Right now, somewhere on the ocean, a cruise ship is sailing with a body on board, and the 4, 5, 6,000 passengers on that ship have no idea. You've probably heard the myths that the ship turns around, that they bury people at sea, that the crew stashes bodies in the ice cream freezer. None of that is true. What happens is stranger, more organized, and more invisible than anything you've imagined. Here's the thing that should get your attention. In 2025, the cruise industry expected to carry 37.7 million passengers across 310 ocean-going ships. That is more people than the entire population of Canada, floating around the world's oceans in cities the size of small towns. And in any town of 6,000 people, something happens regularly that nobody likes to talk about. People die. On cruise ships, it happens roughly 200 times a year. Run the math, and that is about one death for every 150,000 guests, which sounds reassuringly rare, until you realize it also means 3 to 4 deaths every single week somewhere on the water. Statistically, while you're watching this video, there is a decent chance a body is resting quietly below the waterline of a ship full of people playing shuffleboard and eating soft serve. And the 200 figure only covers what gets reported. The first comprehensive academic study of cruise mortality found there is no single global registry, no central authority that counts the dead at sea. Of the deaths it did verify across 2 decades, 89% were passengers, and 61% of those were Americans. The cruise industry handles death constantly, quietly, and largely off the books, not through any conspiracy, but because the ocean sits outside every country's normal accounting. It has always known this, and it has built something remarkable to deal with it: a complete, self-contained system of rooms, codes, refrigeration, paperwork, and international law that activates the moment a heart stops beating at sea and shuts down again without a single passenger ever noticing. Today, we're going to walk through that entire system, from the hidden room below your cabin to the legal maze that decides where a body is allowed to leave the ship. Let's start with the room itself, because it is not optional. Every ocean-going cruise ship is required to carry body bags and maintain a working morgue, not a converted closet, a dedicated refrigerated facility, and by rule it must be kept completely separate from any food storage areas. Most cruise ship morgues are small, with capacity for 3 to 6 bodies, though the largest ships carry up to 10 individual refrigerated units. Think about what that means. When naval architects design a $2 billion floating resort, somewhere between the water slides and the champagne bar, someone allocates square footage for the dead. The morgue is typically placed on the lowest decks, deep in crew territory, below the waterline, far from any corridor a passenger would ever walk. It sits near the ship's medical center, tucked into the industrial part of the vessel that guests never see, the part with the laundry, the provisions, the engine spaces. There's a reason you've never stumbled into it. The entire lower ship is a parallel world with its own corridors, its own elevators, and its own rules, and the morgue is its quietest room. And unlike a hospital morgue, this one has to hold a stable, near-freezing temperature through tropical heat, engine vibration, and storms, for voyages that can run weeks between meaningful ports. Because failure is not an option you can fix at sea, bodies can be stored there for up to about a week while a much larger machine spins up around them. But before we get to that machine, you need to understand why this room exists at all, because for most of maritime history, it didn't. For centuries, the ocean itself was the morgue. When a sailor died at sea, the crew sewed the body into a canvas shroud, often the man's own hammock, weighted it with lead shot, and the captain read a short ceremony before the remains were committed to the deep. That was the system. It worked for navies, for merchant fleets, for the great migration ships. Even into the golden age of the ocean liners, when ships like the original Queen Mary carried over 2 million passengers across the Atlantic, death at sea was handled at sea. But somewhere in the 20th century, the equation flipped. Refrigeration got better. Families expected a funeral, a grave, a place to visit. International law tightened around what you could and couldn't put in the ocean. And the passenger ship transformed from a means of transport into a floating vacation, where the last thing any company wanted was a burial ceremony on the pool deck. The modern morgue below the waterline is the direct descendant of that canvas hammock. Same problem, radically different solution. Today, only one true ocean liner is left, Cunard's Queen Mary II, still running 7-day Atlantic crossings with 2,700 passengers, many of them elderly repeat travelers. Ships like that treat the morgue as core infrastructure, the same way they treat lifeboats, because the numbers say it will be used. So what actually happens in the moment someone dies? This is where the system gets genuinely fascinating, because the first thing that happens is language. If you've cruised before, you may have heard a calm voice on the intercom say something like, "Operation Bright Star, Deck 7. It sounds like nothing. Passengers keep eating, but every crew member on the ship just heard a very specific message. There is a medical emergency serious enough that a life is in danger, and the response team needs to move now. And if the voice says Operation Rising Star instead, the crew hears something else entirely. Someone on board has died. These codes are used across almost all major cruise lines, and they exist for one reason: to mobilize hundreds of trained people at full speed while 4,000 vacationers hear absolutely nothing alarming. A cruise ship is selling paradise, and paradise cannot have a public address announcement about a corpse. So the ship speaks two languages simultaneously, one for you, one for the people running it, broadcast over the same speakers at the same time. And the person that Rising Star calls summons first is someone most passengers never think about: the ship's doctor. Here's something that surprises people. A large cruise ship is legally a small hospital. Under guidelines developed with the American College of Emergency Physicians, which are mandatory for every major cruise line operating ships with more than 100 people aboard, each vessel must carry at least one qualified medical professional available around the clock. An examination room, an intensive care room, lab equipment, and the ability to monitor vital signs and administer medications. Carnival, for example, staffs its ships with anywhere from 1 physician and 3 nurses up to 2 physicians and 5 nurses, depending on the ship's size. These teams are good. About 95% of everything that walks or is carried into a shipboard medical center gets treated and managed right there on the water. But there's a limit to what any hospital can do, and the numbers tell you exactly where that limit is. According to the CDC, roughly half of everyone seeking medical care on cruise ships is over 65. Cardiovascular problems account for only around 3% of medical center visits, but they account for 80% of onboard deaths. Read that again. The thing that kills people at sea is almost always the heart. It strikes fast, and it often strikes people who felt fine at the breakfast buffet. And unlike on land, there is no ambulance to call for backup. For the rare cases the ship cannot handle, the only option is a medical evacuation, a helicopter, or a diversion, and hundreds of miles from shore, in darkness or weather, sometimes there is no evacuation to be had. When the doctor loses that fight, they pronounce the death, complete the documentation, and the second phase of the system begins. The quiet phase, because now the ship has a logistical problem that has to be solved invisibly. Moving a body from a passenger cabin, or a pool deck, or a dining room, down to that refrigerated room at the bottom of the ship, without a single guest understanding what they're seeing. This is where the parallel world below decks earns its keep. The body is placed in one of those legally required body bags and moved through crew quarters and service elevators, the same hidden circulatory system that moves your room service and your fresh towels. If a death happens somewhere public, crews are trained to screen the area and work with practiced calm. Specially trained care teams take over the human side. Carnival describes having employees specifically trained to provide emotional and logistical support to grieving loved ones, and every major line runs some version of the same playbook. Meanwhile, the rest of the ship simply continues. The shows go on, the casino stays open. And this is the part that unsettles people when they first learn it. There is no announcement. Passengers are never formally told that someone has died on board. You can sail an entire cruise, laughing, dancing, sunburn, blissfully unaware that 2 decks below your cabin, the morgue is occupied. The system is not hiding this from you out of cruelty. It's doing it because grief is contagious, panic is worse, and the ship still has days of ocean ahead of it. And that brings us to the clock, because the morgue is not a destination. It's a waiting room with a deadline. Remains can be held on board for up to about a week, and that week is when the really complicated part of the system takes over, the part that has nothing to do with refrigeration and everything to do with maps. Here's the problem almost nobody considers. A body cannot simply be taken off a ship at the next dot on the itinerary. The port has to be what the industry calls a suitable port. The receiving country must be willing and able to accept the remains, conduct an examination if required, issue a death certificate, and support the process of flying the body home. A tiny island stop in the South Pacific may have a pier, a beach, and no medical examiner for 1,000 miles. So on remote itineraries, the body often stays in the morgue for the rest of the voyage until the ship reaches a major port. On a standard Caribbean cruise out of Florida, remains are frequently kept on board all the way back to the United States, where a local medical examiner can formally issue the death certificate, which means the ship's schedule quietly becomes a legal instrument. The itinerary you booked it for the beaches is for one family on board, the timeline that determines when they can begin to bury their loved one. And when that suitable port finally arrives, the system performs its most carefully choreographed move, the offload. The body is taken off the ship as early in the morning as possible, through a separate exit away from every passenger area, timed so that by the time you're leaning on the rail with your coffee watching the port wake up, the transfer is already complete. On the pier, local authorities and a contracted funeral home take custody, and if the family is disembarking too, the ship's care team walks them through every step. From the moment of death to the moment the body leaves the ship, the goal never changes. Total dignity for one family, total invisibility for everyone else. Most passengers will go home, post their vacation photos, and never learn that they shared their voyage with a farewell. Now here's the angle nobody ever mentions when this topic comes up, and it might be the most revealing part of the entire system. Who's in charge of a death at sea? Because the answer is genuinely strange. A cruise ship is a sliver of a foreign country moving across international water. Most major cruise ships fly the flag of states like the Bahamas, Panama, or Bermuda. And legally, that flag state's rules travel with the ship. So a death in the middle of the Atlantic can technically occur on the territory of a country the passenger never visited in their life. Then there's the country whose waters the ship happens to be in, which has its own authority. Then there's the country of the next port, which can require an examination of anyone who died on board and demand the body be offloaded. And if the passenger is American, there's one more layer, the FBI. It is standard practice for the FBI to review deaths that occur on cruise ships involving U.S. citizens, coordinating with the Coast Guard and Customs and Border Protection. When a 48-year-old Texas man died aboard the Carnival Dream in 2025, the FBI opened a review, and Carnival had to publicly explain that this is routine protocol for every death at sea, not a signal of foul play. So a single passing at sea can simultaneously involve a Bahamian flag registry, a Mexican port authority, an American federal agency, and a ship's doctor from South Africa, all applying different rule books to the same quiet room below the waterline. The morgue is small. The jurisdiction around it circles the planet. And then there's the money, which is where the story stops being fascinating and becomes something every future cruiser genuinely needs to hear. When someone dies on a cruise, the cruise line's responsibility is care, storage, and coordination. What it does not cover is cost. Getting a body home, the process called repatriation, is paid for by the family, not the cruise line. Flying human remains internationally involves mortuary preparation, specialized containers, airline fees, and consular paperwork. And typical travel insurance policies cap repatriation benefits around $12,000, which tells you roughly what it costs. Families who sail without coverage can be blindsided. In one case documented by cruise researchers, a widow whose husband died at sea couldn't afford to fly him home at all until an anonymous donor stepped in with $20,000. There's an even smaller detail that catches people. Passports. On closed-loop cruises, many passengers sail without one. But if a body or the grieving family accompanying it has to leave the ship in a foreign port, everyone leaving needs a passport. And emergency documents take time to arrange in a country where the family may not speak the language. The lesson buried in all of this is brutally simple. The ship is prepared for death. Most passengers are not. Which raises the question everyone eventually asks: what happens when the system runs out of room? Because 3 to 6 refrigerated spaces sounds fine until you remember who takes long cruises. The itineraries that spend weeks at sea, the transatlantic crossings, the world cruises, skew dramatically older. Longer voyage, older passengers, fewer suitable ports along the way. Every variable moves in the same direction at once. In 2007, a sociologist who studies the cruise industry described a transatlantic repositioning cruise from Fort Lauderdale to Lisbon, on which the morgue filled completely, and the crew had to start finding other places to put the bodies. That is a real documented account, and it's almost certainly the seed of cruising's most famous dark legend. That when the morgue is full, the overflow goes into the ice cream freezer, and that free extra scoops on deck mean the crew is clearing space. Let's be clear, that part is a myth. The morgue must be separated from food storage by regulation, and lines have contingency plans that do not involve the dessert supply. But notice what the legend gets right. It correctly intuits that the ship is a sealed system with finite cold storage, days from land, doing quiet arithmetic about capacity. Passengers invented the ice cream story because they sensed the real story. Somewhere below their feet, space for the dead is limited and someone is managing it. There is one exception, one situation where the old ways briefly return, and it's more beautiful than you'd expect. Burial at sea still exists, not as an emergency measure, but as a choice. In American waters, it's regulated by the Environmental Protection Agency, and the rules read like a treaty between grief and the ocean. Remains must be committed at least 3 nautical miles from shore. Full-body burials require water at least 600 feet deep. Everything placed in the water must be fully biodegradable. No plastic, no metal, no permanent monument of any kind, and the event must be reported to the EPA within 30 days. Several major cruise lines will actually accommodate the scattering of cremated ashes at sea, with the ship's officers helping families hold a small ceremony at the rail, provided the urn is biodegradable and the ship is beyond the 3-mile line. Think about what that means. The same industry that built a hidden refrigerated room to keep death invisible will also, on request, slow down and give a family the oldest maritime farewell there is. The canvas hammock became a certified biodegradable urn. The captain's prayer became an EPA report form, but the gesture underneath survived 400 years of regulation completely intact. The sea is a resting place. And maybe that's the right way to understand the person this whole system serves. Not a statistic, a passenger. Consider Beatrice Muller. In '99, she and her husband Robert were on a world cruise aboard the Queen Elizabeth II, something they did together every year, when Robert died on the ship. The protocols we've walked through, the codes, the morgue, the paperwork, all of it happened for him. And here is what Beatrice did next. Within 10 months, she sold everything she owned and moved on to the QE2 permanently, living aboard for nearly 9 years, until the ship itself retired in 2008. The vessel where her husband died became her home. She understood something most of us miss when we hear the words cruise ship morgue and shiver. The ship didn't fail Robert. The ship caught him. Every year, roughly 200 people end their lives mid-vacation on the ocean, most of them from sudden cardiac events. Most of them over 65. Many of them doing exactly what they loved. And every single time, a system nobody talks about wakes up, holds them with dignity in a cold, quiet room below the waterline, navigates 3 countries' worth of law, and carries them home. So the next time you're on a cruise and you hear a calm, slightly odd announcement float across the pool deck, you'll know there's a second language being spoken on that ship. The invisible room below the waterline isn't a dark secret, it's a promise.